if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. That's what millions of Americans that are older workers actually have been saying for years, and more are saying the very same thing because of the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19 situation in which they're losing jobs, let's face it, because of their age. And someone who has said that, and in fact said, why me? Well, why not me? Is my guest in this interview. And quite frankly, if him, it could happen to anybody, because it's somebody who you may recognize and who I have a lot of respect and admiration for. Very talented, very accomplished. Ray Suarez, you may recognize him from PBS NewsHour. He was also host of American Abroad, Public Radio International was the network for that. Also NPR's Talk of the Nation, he was host, and previously was a correspondent with CNN and WMAQ NBC in Chicago, Ray Suarez. So Ray, what made you say, why not me?
Well, looking at the numbers, looking at the career trajectories of workers over 50, but especially over 55, the numbers paint a very compelling case that no matter who you are, you can face job insecurity. And once you do, you are in for a set of challenges unlike those of workers just a few years younger. If you lose a job, you're likely to be out of work longer. If you lose a job, the next one you get is likely to pay significantly less. And after 60, the erosion in expected compensation is enormous, and the spell in unemployment is even longer. So no matter what kind of bumpers you try to build in around your life to make sure that that doesn't happen to you, there's really no guarantee. In my case, I didn't lose a job as much as I lost a company. The place where I was working went out of business. And after that, I entered a period of job insecurity that I thought after 40 years in the news business just simply wouldn't be in the cards for me. And now I'm running into just rank ageism of a way that's so naked and so obvious that I almost want to say to the hiring managers, oh, come on, you and I really know what's going on here. But it's quite something.
And can you go deeper in that? I mean, you don't have to necessarily name names, but what have you been experiencing?
Well, I've made the finals for several jobs and then lost them to people of significantly less track record, significantly less experience, significantly less varied experience, which in a newsroom setting is something that you really want. I've done domestic, international, I've done politics, public health, environment reporting. I think there's probably some value in the period of an impeached president to actually have somebody in the newsroom who remembers the last impeachment and covered it. You know, I have been. Now there are problems with the business that we can talk about later that make this even more acute, but I've been interested and surprised to see how quickly a business that is said to prize experience really doesn't care that much about it at all when you come right down to it.
And, you know, full disclosure, I used to be in television news myself, and I thought in the late 80s it was going to hell. But I was fortunate that well, you know, I grew up in the business, but I was fortunate too in that I had older reporters when I was coming up. I mean, when I was at WHO-TV in Des Moines, I had George Lefty Mills, who was known by every president since Johnson, knew everything, knew everybody, and he sat next to me, and I learned my skills as a journalist went up 40% just sitting next to him and just talking to him. So there's there's the mix, and there's also the mentorship that not just in the news business, but in any business is starting to lack from so many enterprises.
And institutional memory, which is important. There have been times during recent short-term contract work, freelance jobs, where I've been working with people who were born when I was already a newsroom veteran. And it's not that they're stupid, they're exquisitely educated, they're eager, they're curious, they're bright, none of those things. There's just stuff they don't know. And, you know, when you're talking about how the Vietnam War ended, when you're talking about how the law was used to pry open the Nixon White House in order to do certain kinds of discovery and get your hands on certain kinds of documents and information, it's not a shame for them not to know that. They're kids. But it is arguably of some value to have somebody who does know that, who remembers the Cold War, which after all wasn't that long ago. It is a remarkable thing to see a business that's shrinking, whose business model is in crisis, sort of just lurching from thing to thing, floundering around trying to figure out what the next thing to do is, and deciding, well, let's just get a bunch of kids in here, like an Andy Hardy movie, and we'll put on a show. And that's where we're at now.
So, you know, in my experiences, I'm typically finding three reasons for ageism, or the older worker not being able to get a job or being laid off. One that is considered is that the healthcare costs. Number two is, quite frankly, the fault of the older worker not being up to date. Not being, you know, I'm finding that a lot of things that are ascribed to millennials in business, they aren't millennials. They're the way of the business. The fail fast, the fail often, the pivot quickly, and take risk. And then the third thing, though, is the stereotypes and presumptions and assumptions, which for those people who are up to date are totally wrong. Or somebody such as in your case, because it's not just your experience, it's also your inherent talents and abilities to do it. So what have you been finding? All three when you've been dealing with trying to find
it never gets to the, even though I can do the technical things, and since I've been freelancing, I've been my own sound engineer and my own video
Welcome
engineer.
to the club. Yeah, me too.
And
yeah.
So I've been doing TV from my office. I've been doing radio from my office. For instance, a job came up in a big market, a high visibility job. And a friend of mine said, you should apply for that job. Well-meaning, well-intended. And I said, you know, yeah, I will apply for that job because I think it's an interesting job, but, you know, I don't think I'm going to get it. And he says, well, I'm going to write them a letter. So this guy followed through. He was as good as his word. He wrote the station a letter and got back an answer almost immediately from somebody very high up the food chain, who wrote, oh, Ray Suarez, we love Ray Suarez. He is terrific at this work. You are exactly right. But we're looking for newer voices. And, you know, you could, I guess it's thin gruel to make an ageism suit out of. It's something that you can really hardly ever prove. But what does that mean? What do I have, an old voice? Or do I sound like Slim Pickens or Walter Brennan, or you know, some old prospector extra from a black and white weepy from the 30s? Yes, we're looking for new voices. One job where I was passed over in favor of someone with almost no experience. In the news release that they issued after they made the hire, and I was the recommendation of the search committee that was formed to do the hire. they extolled this person's status as a young parent. Well, you know, and how uniquely positioned this person was to talk about the challenges of young parenthood, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't in the job description, but there it was.
Were they the young parent correspondent?
It was what you can say when you don't have that much to say. It's crazy. So, okay, so my oldest kid is 31. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do. And I'm not having another kid just so I can get a job.
Well, what's I don't know, truth be known, and if anyone happens to be watching that was an old boss of mine, I did have good bosses. Now you can decide whether you were one of them, but so often I found many television executives to be lacking in just common sense judgment, always overlooking the data and misinterpreting it. But what you were just talking about, what hit me when you were talking about new voice, meaning, we want that younger attitude. And it's kind of like, wait a minute. Are you forsaking probably your biggest audience? Because when it comes to watching television and television news and cable, the audience is more like people with us. And as I've got an infographic on my site showing about boomer buying power, that's where 70% of the income, 70% of the spending, most of the spending and long-term spending is coming from this age group. But it's like, no, the trend since the early 1900s was the, 18 to 35-year-old category or demographic where they don't have money. So you do wonder if they're kind of making a huge mistake by going on a big assumption.
Well, in the particular case of public radio and television, the money that they ask the audience to contribute, if you were to plot that out along an age cohort continuum, where do you think most of the money that fuels public radio and television comes from? Not from 18 to 35s. Now, of course, as a business, there's a challenge embedded in that. You have to figure out how to get that audience inside the tent, cultivate them, keep them longitudinally. Absolutely. Until they become givers and supporters. Absolutely. Very much part of the job. But ignoring your older audience, the people who got you to today, that's a chance. You're rolling the dice. But good luck to them.
Yeah, I'm calling it throwing out the boomers with the bathwater. You can quote me on that. So, okay, so back to your situation and moving forward. Now what? I mean, are you seeing yourself heading in a new direction? Are you seeing things that you wish that you had done differently and now you're learning from that to pivot or whatever? Now what?
I'm doing contract work, gig work, part-time work, cobbling it all together into something like a full-time revenue stream. I had been aware that this was a possibility earlier in my career, but I worked really hard to build in the kind of bumpers around my career where that wasn't going to be an issue, or so I thought. And I watched older workers remain in the workplace, the older edge of boomers, war babies, who stuck in their jobs for quite a long time. Jim Lehrer was close to 80 and still sitting at the anchor desk when I was working there. Charlie Rose was in his 70s. Chris Matthews was in his 70s. For some reason, they could hang, but once I hit 60, the marketplace was, I think the marketplace was unmiddling, you might say, where there was a slice of older workers at the top. Judy Woodruff is 73, who are able to stay in their jobs because of long tenure. There's an army at the bottom of younger workers who keep the whole clanking machinery of the business lurching forward. And then in the middle, there are career guys like me and hundreds of others who are finding it quite difficult to piece together the final years of their career. I've been a member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists for many years and go to their annual meeting every year. And for the last decade, every subsequent annual meeting, there are more and more veterans, people with really good careers, great clip files, work for America's terrific regional newspapers, who have a badge with their name on it and no organization because they're freelancing, because they are self-employed, because they're consultants, because they're doing gig work. That's, I guess I'm in that middle of the deck, like mid-list authors. And so, I don't have the ability, the privilege, you might say, of those workers who are able to make their own terms and dictate their own terms for leaving full-time employment. If you read Money Magazine, if you read personal finance columns, week after week after year, they say, don't retire too early. You're going to live longer than you ever expected. You're going to live longer than your parents and longer than your grandparents. So don't retire too early and really get ready to retire. I took the message on board. I did what I was told. I plan to work for years and years to come. But the marketplace is saying, well, sorry. To you and hundreds of thousands of other workers, even if you intend to work into your late 60s or to 70, you may find it quite difficult to do. And even though cumulatively the unemployment rate for older workers is lower than for other age cohorts, one of the things that signifies is not enhanced job security, but fear of insecurity. 25% of workers over 55 say they're job bound, that they're not moving jobs as they would have, as they want to, because they're afraid that if they move, it would enhance their insecurity and lead to quicker and quicker tenures at more and more places, that their work lives would become unstable if they tried to move, which is something that younger workers don't report. When they need to move, when they want to move, they move. Older workers are job bound. And, we make it very rough as a society. When you look at the tax code, when you look at how we've attached prepare for retirement, health insurance to employment and fuse those two in a way that we, even in a world of gig work, we haven't totally unraveled that and reformulated those things to reflect the new realities of the workplace. So there's a lot going on there. I mean, I'm paying for my own health insurance, made possible by the Affordable Care Act. It would have been so much worse otherwise. I am preparing my own retirement, but was planning to be in work where I had a 401k and certainly would have preferred and desired that. So I'm doing a lot of these things on my own, and that's not the optimal way. It's not the ideal way. It costs more on both scores, both to plan your retirement and to buy your own health care. And yet, unlike contingent labor in earlier decades, you can't charge a premium for your work that covers the gap in expenditure. So for instance, when I was at NBC, they laid off a large number of engineers and turned them into day workers, cameramen, editors, sound people. And their day rate was actually more than their old union day rate because it was understood that they had to buy their own health care and prepare for their own retirement. Now, that price premium, because there's so many people in the marketplace bidding for the same work, it bids down the cost of labor. So you can't command a premium because you're also handling those other costs. Costs of your time, the costs of the light in your office, the phone, cable television, a high-speed Wi-Fi hookup to send your video and send your audio.
Premium Zoom membership, yeah.
Right, you pay for all of that yourself,
and it adds up.
You can't command a premium that covers the gap between what your bosses used to provide, just because they provided the workplace, and what you now have to provide yourself.
So as a living case study, boy, I hope I didn't diminish you by saying that. No. But as a living case study, two sets of people, two sets of older people. To those who haven't gotten in this kind of situation yet, your advice, and to those who are in a kindred spirit perspective that you think might be helpful. So first of all, to those people who think they still have the bumpers around them, what would you say?
Be ready for the possibility that you will enter a period of higher job instability as you age in the workplace. The pace picks up after age 60, and the difficulties in both finding new work and finding remunerative work pick up after age 60. You start to see it at 50, it intensifies at 55, but it's supercharged after 60. It depends on the industry that you're working in. Some are far more actively shedding labor than others, and some are moving much more quickly into the contingent labor world. I liken what's going on in the news business now to the morning shape up in On the Waterfront. If you remember Ilya Kazan's masterpiece, which opens up on the dock with a bunch of guys standing there with their hands in their pocket, and the hiring boss comes out and just taps them on the shoulder and says, okay, you guys work today, the rest of you come back tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We've just become this enormous hiring hall, and the rest of you come back tomorrow. You have to be ready for that. No, I'm not saying living in white-knuckled fear of it, but you should at least be thinking about what that means to your ability to make a living if it were to happen. If it doesn't happen, cool. If it does happen, at least you've given it some thought and have a fleshed out operational plan B. There are many industries that haven't changed as drastically as my own in this modern era, but there are actually fewer people making a living today in American journalism than 20 years ago, and there's like 3 times as much content. So the internet has been an enabler, it has been a magic device, and it's also been a job destroyer. Absolutely. It's made a lot of things easier and wonderful and easier to do, and it's made the work. When I talk to students who say, you know, I want to be a reporter, those are people who may have a very hard time having a middle-class existence as a working person. Saving up to own a house, being able to put away a little bit of money for their own kids' education, paying their own school debts. The work is now far more insecure. It offers fewer legible, coherent ladders for advancement. And there's a big rush for the exit in the early 30s and another one in the early 40s, as people realize, oh my God, I've worked in 5 different places and I'm not vested in a retirement plan in any of them, because I was 3 years over here and 2 years over there and 4 years over there. And I'm just, you know, I've got nothing. I haven't been able to buy anything. I haven't been able to put together a personal life that resembles the one that I thought I would have back when I was 20, and I thought I was trying to think of what it would be like to be in my 30s. Here I am in my 30s, and I'm not living the life that I thought I was going to live. For a lot of young people who want to be in the news business, that life just isn't going to happen for them. And they have to think about what that means. I went into it pretty eyes open and watched people who were just somewhat older than me making their way and tried to figure out what it means. And when I was young, I moved a lot and that kind of thing. But then there came a time where I had a little bit of control over my work life, a little bit of market power, a little bit of brand power, and was able to wrest back some control over my life, my personal life, my work life from the workplace. Well, now I don't have that power. Now, any day off is not really a day off. It's a day where I'm not getting paid to do anything. If I have a sick day, if I just can't work because I'm not feeling well, that's not a paid day. It's just a day where you can't work and you're losing money. So the whole head orientation of going back into freelance work is entirely different. So if you're entering that time in your career, you should be thinking about all these things. Again, not necessarily planning for them to happen, but at least thinking about what to do if it does, because it's going to be the truth of work in the 60s for a lot more people.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, preparing your mindset and maybe even doing some self-evaluation. Obviously, there's been a huge trend towards self-employment or entrepreneurialism. You hear, Kaufman study that there are twice the number of boomers starting up new businesses than millennials. Another report out of the UK that was a global report was that there's a 7 in 10 chance that older worker is going to succeed versus the younger worker. But then I also find out that part of the reason why they did that, or why so many people are going to be self-employed or starting their own businesses, and it doesn't have to be a big brick and mortar one, is because of ageism. And so it's even preparing for that to some large degree, that kind of option that's going to be out there to, quite frankly, avoid the ageist situation.
Right. I mean, you have to interrogate that statistic. Yeah, they're starting businesses, but maybe because they have to, not because
exactly.
they want
very
to.
much so. And Rich Eisenberg, who you probably know of Next Avenue, who's a journalist who's got so tied into all the trends and everything. That's his major assertion. It's because you don't have any choice. But the beauty of it is that nowadays, with democratization of technology, as it's sometimes referred to, it can enable you to do things that we never could have imagined doing 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, has that thought crossed your mind that you may just have to do a complete reinvention?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot in the last couple of months about what it would look like to put together enough work to get me over my own personal planned upon finish line, and whether I could do it, and under what circumstances. And yeah, I mean, sure, if I have to do it, if that's the way it's going to work out, I'll be fine. I really will be fine. Your druthers is a totally different thing. Would I rather go into an office every day and, instead of beating the bushes by myself in my office with the door closed, doing the 5th negotiation for a couple of days worth of work, and hammering out the details of it? Would I rather just go to the office and do what I understand to be my job?
Right.
You bet.
Sure.
And
sure.
have the
And
boss pay the electric bill and the
Yep.
telephone bill, and the boss pay for the paper in the copying machine and pay for the person at the front door who screens calls. Yeah, I mean, that was good. That was fine. I
Well,
mean,
and we were wired,
people,
and we were wired for that. We were wired for that. We grew up in a when business was hierarchical, where there was this box, you know, and the people who fit in the box. And now there is no box. It's like,
but also, you know, I wanted to not have to sweat the things that didn't have that much to do with the work.
yeah,
I wanted, you know, a first baseman for the Washington Nationals doesn't obsess about who's painting the lines, the white line that goes from home plate to first base. He shows up at work and the line is painted and the grass is mowed. And if it gets dark, somebody turns on the lights. I didn't want to necessarily have to think about how all the other stuff that was necessary for me to be able to do my work happened. I just wanted to be able to do my work. And as pared down a set of arrangements as I could manage would be great. You know, just let me be a reporter. Let me make beat calls. Let me call contacts. Let me get out there and do some interviews. This other stuff doesn't interest me that much. And you know, there's no shame in that game. It just doesn't interest me that much. Now it's all part of the stuff I have to worry about. Obviously on a different one-person scale, but there's no particular virtue in me worrying about it now. You know, I was my own engineer for a live shot on the National Mall the other day, a total one-man band. I set up the tripod. I put the camera on the tripod. I ran the mic cord from the camera and worked remotely through my IFB line with a technician somewhere else who helped me frame the shot. Well, all right, that was interesting. Kind of cool that what used to take a truckload worth of equipment, I could now accomplish with something that I could carry in a shoulder bag. Yeah, interesting. But if I never had to worry about that kind of stuff, that would be fine too.
and yeah, and I'm totally in that same boat. In fact, one of the things I'm grateful for was my first job out of college was at KAAL TV, Channel 6 in Austin, Minnesota.
Wow.
Tiny market. It's where Hormel is. But, you know, I would go out in an AMC Pacer, pre-internet days, pre-cell phone days, but a beeping pager. And I would be like, okay, package this, do a voiceover, sound on tape of this, and find another package in SOT while you're out there up in Owatonna. And you shot your own stuff, you edit your own stuff. But my point is to this day, that experience that I learned of how to pull that out and pull those stories out of my butt, right through snowstorms, left-handed, you know, driving back to Austin, in the very kind of situation that you said, in doing the kind of stuff that I'm doing, where, you know, here's my studio, is beneficial to me. And I think it really gets down to the bottom line, and what you're really talking on is being able to be adaptive to just, this is just the new way of it. And quite frankly, learning how to adapt and learn can keep you young. So one thing we didn't touch on is, or one of the questions is that you did answer for those people who still have a job, but now your kindred spirits out there, your fellow brethren of people who are trying to figure it out. I mean, you're still trying to figure it out, but what insight or advice would people in that situation find useful from you?
Well, what I can encourage them to do is not lose heart, not give up. Wake up every day trying to think of new approaches toward marketing yourself and what you've got to sell in the marketplace. Part of the problem is the computerization of the job search. It's been extolled and touted as a great advance, but scholars who work in labor market theory know that the algorithm kicks out terrific candidates because the algorithm is not a human being and can't tell from a resume and a job tenure the value of an individual applicant. And so a monster or those various sites may aggregate 7,000 resumes. That doesn't enhance your chance of getting anything. Your ability to same amount of work to apply for 50 jobs as you used to expend to apply for 5 is not doing you any favors. And it is very, very hard in all walks of life to look for work now for qualified individuals. And you may try tricks like not filling out the year you got your degree, hoping that you may be able to fly under the radar and not age out of their algorithm.
No.
It's not going to work.
No, it's not going to work. In fact, I argue embrace it, tout it, and show people that you're up to date. And then at least you've got a chance.
It is a terrible, terrible development. And you got to wonder what HR departments are for if they are farming out their brains to algorithms that then pass by promising candidates who could give them a good 10 years on the job, value added, and is in many ways exactly what they're looking for. So I worry a great deal about not only the future of work, but the future of looking for work, because people who hire have built-in barriers around themselves. Understandably, when there are so many people looking for work in so many fields, I get it. You don't want your phone ringing nonstop, 9 to 6, Monday through Saturday. At the same time, part of what your bosses have asked you to do is look for the best candidates for vacancies that exist in your institution. And if you're letting Monster do all the work, Monster's not necessarily doing you that much good. And quite frankly, Peter Capelli at Princeton and others have found that many of those jobs never even get filled. It's almost like performative help wanted ads, where they aggregate so many aspirants that they almost choke on their own success and take a very long time to actually put a person in the job. But because of the bizarre and sometimes paradoxical incentives that exist in the workplace, if you go an extra 5 weeks without having to pay that salary, that's not bad. That goes right on the bottom line if you can get enough productivity out of the rest of the people in the enterprise. It's a terrible setup for people.
Yeah, and I would even say, well, two other quick examples. Number one of my millennial sons, in looking for a job, had several places where he was begging to come in he was going through like 5 phone interviews, sometimes not even Skype or Zoom, and he was begging to come in to do his interview. He's like, if it's 30 minutes, it's fine. I'll show up and do it in person. They didn't want to do it. How the hell can you get a read on somebody? I mean, if I was hiring somebody, you want to get a read from them because it's not just the pro forma qualifications. But the other thing is that I've talked to a couple of people who said that they have done voice interviews with an AI computer.
Wow.
So it's not even a human being.
That's terrible.
Oh. You know, I can maybe accept it if that's like some initial steps or something like that. But at the end of the day, you know, it's the person that you're dealing with. You know, skills can be taught. It's like, what is that person going to be like? Because that's also the argument sometimes against older workers in the workplace. I've heard HR managers say, hey, we're also kind of a dating service. When we're looking to hire somebody, you know, are they going to be a good fit in this organization? If it's a young, nimble, risky, fail fast, fail often kind of thing, yeah, you got to make sure you got the right personality. Is somebody going to come in like the old fart, you know, or this is the way I used to do it? Well, yeah. I mean, that's the boomer's fault or the older worker's fault. But how are you going to find that out if you don't meet the person face to face? It is a stunning mess of what we
Well,
got.
it's almost as if you set up the machinery to not hire people.
Or not to hire the right person.
Let's set up a machinery where we actually don't meet people, don't assess people, and don't hire them. Because these computerized job aggregation sites have thousands of jobs on them that you'll see. I mean, I go to LinkedIn and I go to their job listings, and there are jobs still there 6, 7, 8 weeks out. I think, how interested really are they in filling this job? If, for example, there was a job with one of the new media companies covering religion. I wrote a whole book on American religion. That was a critical success and it sold reasonably well too. And as my introduction, I put my resume in the book and sent them the book. Didn't even get a call back. And I figured, if that isn't at least a demonstration of the fact that I can write about religion in America, I don't know what is. But who knows? I never heard a thing from that organization. Crazy.
So what's next for you?
I'm hoping that this next period, if it doesn't succeed in destroying the business, because right now the long tail challenge of dealing with the pandemic is really kind of a black hole as far as understanding what kind of business will emerge at the end of it. There are newspapers that are going to go out of business. That's already happening. There are newsrooms, broadcast newsrooms that are being pushed to the wall.
Right.
It is hard to know what happens from here on out. But if we can sort of emerge from this, start to put together quarters of economic growth, I would like to, because while the pandemic is happening, an amazing election is going to roll out, one that's critical for the future of the country. Either a second chapter of an administration or a whole new one will be coming to Washington in 7 months.
And of course, all the congressional and Senate and local and state elections too.
Absolutely.
And after everything we've been through, this is going to be interesting and also very directional for our future.
And a good time, it could be argued, a good time for me as a job aspirant. We'll see. I'm doing new things, different things. Right now hosting an online series of courses for a new startup called Knowable. I'm guest hosting some of Slate's suite of podcasts in the late summer. I'm doing this reporting for a European 24-hour cable news service called Euronews. I'm doing a lot of things. I hope something shakes out and I can do just one thing and do it well and do it for another 5 or 6 years. That would be ideal. I have another book I want to write. I'm talking with a major American regional newspaper about launching a series, a multimedia series on race in America. And certainly the events of recent days have only spoken to the urgency of that topic. So hopefully something shakes out. I can't be anxious about it. I can't chew myself up and constantly have this roiling in my guts. It's no way to live. I'm looking forward. I'm hopeful. I'm working toward making some of these things happen and happen well. And as the last year and a half has amply demonstrated to me, I have very limited control over the outcome. I can no longer predict the way things are going to go down. So I'm waiting to see what happens, just like anybody else.
Ray, what's the best way people can get in touch with you?
My Twitter handle is at Ray Suarez News. They can find me at LinkedIn, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. So last question. If there was one takeaway for those of us who are older, by the way, if you're in Silicon Valley, that means you're 38. Based on the experience that you're having right now and that you've gone through, what would be the number one bit of advice you'd want to impart on people?
I may be the worst single person to ask that question, but I'll take a crack at it.
Okay,
well,
please
you know,
do. What the hell?
Here's why.
Hey,
I mean,
how's that for a setup? Hey, everybody, listen to this.
You know, but I say that in and without false modesty, because I really had to come to terms with what I wanted the last phases of my working years, full-time working years, to be like. And when the possibilities existed for starting something totally new, a major think tank in town approached me about applying for a job they had as a vice president controlling one of their pods. And I had to sit down. The job would have required me to master a whole new skill set. And I had to think, all right, do you want to do that, A? So in principle, the idea of mastering a whole new skill set was fine. Did I actually want to do that stuff once the skill set was mastered? And I had to be honest with myself that the answer was no. In this case, it involved, I spoke to the person who was leaving the job, and I said, how much of this job is fundraising? And they said, 40 to 50%. And while I wanted full-time work, while it's a terrific outfit whose work I admire, I had to be honest with myself that spending the last years of my career in a job that was half fundraising might have eventually been a decent fit as I mastered how to do it. But did I really want to do that? And when the answer was no, I thought, you know, I'm probably better off being a guest host on podcasts, which is, I can arguably do very well, as opposed to doing something that I'm maybe not good at and don't want to do. So this is actually counter to the playbook that I keep seeing written for older workers, where you should be anxious to take on new things and learn new skills and blah, blah, blah. I didn't want to be a fundraiser. So while within the broad ambit of working in communications, I'm anxious and happy to learn new things, and I have during this whole period. If they can connect with what I already know how to do, if there's some tether that puts them in the same universe with what I already know how to do, swell. But I had to think carefully about whether I was ready to do anything. And to be honest, I'm not ready to do anything. So I'd rather take a dollar that's a little harder to earn to do something that I'm pretty good at, rather than do something that there's no reason yet to think that I'm pretty good at, because there's only so much time left. I want to work for another 5 to 7 years. Well, hell, how many things do I want to sort of take a flyer on and already know that I don't really want to do that much, but do the work that sometimes we're talking about years of work to get good at something that I'm not even sure I want to be good at. So you have to think about how it is you want to live. what it is you want to do, and think very carefully about what it is you're good at and what it is that you're already good at, gives you a clue toward what else you may be good at. Hope I'm not sounding too obscure there, but I
No,
think
no.
that's a real, your onboard set of skills is not the limit. It's not the end. Of course you should learn new things. Of course you should master new disciplines. But it probably helps if you're working on if I was 25, that's a different timeline. If I was 45, it would be a different timeline. But I'm not. And so how many years do I want to spend mastering something that is not within the ambit of what I already am formidably confident that I'm pretty good at? Or do I have a better shot in the marketplace trying to connect up with those things that I already know I'm pretty good at? So it's that kind of strategic thinking that this situation forces you into, which is probably healthy. It's probably conversations with yourself that you wouldn't have had you not entered an era of job insecurity. So contrary to what the new cover story on AARP, the magazine, where they're telling you at 75 to go learn to be a chemist or or a gymnast or whatever it is they're telling you to, because the sky's the limit and there's absolutely no limit on what you can be good at. I think my best bet now for making a living is to try to find ways to leverage the things that I already have confidence that I'm pretty good at and can demonstrate that skill and connect up with those things into new things that force me to stretch, that force me to grow, but also have some rational connection to the things that I already am pretty confident in my skills.
And maybe a little dose of desire as well. Something you want to.
Yeah, desire helps. I mean, yes, whenever I'm in a restaurant and I see somebody who may be 75 sweeping up under tables, I look at them and I think, if you're sweeping under that table because you're bored and lonely in the house and you want to get out, you want to be with people, you want something to do for a finite number of hours per day, and this gets you out and you're happy with it, great. You go. Terrific for you. But if you're doing that because you have to be, I feel really bad. And we're going to see a lot of people in that situation in the next 10 or 15 years. 30% of people 55 to 60 have less than $25,000 saved for retirement. Yeah. And that's not going to last you for very long. So if you want to be out there, swell. More power to you. That's great. If you're there because you're forced to be, and there's 1,000 other things you'd rather be doing than sweeping up under that table, that's tragic. And I'm doing everything I can not to be in that situation.
Well, best of luck, Ray. Thank you very much.
Good to talk to you. Take care.